During COVID-19, the world was told to stay at home. We have been brought to our knees by a pandemic that has taken the lives of millions, and this fear has changed how we exist in the world. We find comfort, work, and refuge in our own houses. What about those that don't have a home? Our society has a tendency to shame the unhoused, blaming them for their misfortunes, telling them to sort out their traumas, and pretending their systemic barriers don't exist that have pushed them into our streets and parks. They are our neighbors, our co-workers, people who are simply trying to find a place to sleep. These folks have been forced to make parks their home, where they've contended with extreme weather, fires, persecution, and even death.
I was a farmer for most of my life, but unfortunately sexism was alive and well, and it was really hard to get a well-paid job. I often didn't even get interviews. My landlord decided he wanted to sell the farm. Society seems to feel that, oh, you don't become homeless unless there's something wrong with you. I have never done drugs. I only drink socially. I have no criminal record. And as I mentioned, I used to be a 4-H leader. You have to have a lot of security checks to be a 4-H leader. And the poor choice that I made, because of course you're not homeless unless you make poor choices, I chose to farm. And last I checked, everybody eats.
Nobody can afford what the rents are asking. I mean, bachelors are $1,300 a month, some of them. It's crazy. And then if you don't have like bank statements, or they want to do credit checks, if you have poor credit, you're screwed.
Well, this should be frontline press every day, you know, on the news, broadcasts and whatnot, you know, what's going on, what the conditions are, things like that, because it truly amazed me how quickly the community evaporated. Pandemic orders were first set out. We started out, and very few people even had tents. They were out literally sleeping in the wind and the rain.
I can't imagine what it would be like to be living in a tent, in a park or on a street in the middle of the wintertime. Like, how do you keep warm? It's so dangerous.
There were a couple that didn't make it. They passed away right there on the boulevard.
My name is Janet Hanyus. I'm the Director for Indigenous Programs with the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training. If you would ask me what home means to me or what house means to me, I would tell you that my house is a place of residence, it's a shelter, but it's also a place of gathering between me and my children. It's a place where we come back after a tough day and regroup, and we rely on that safety to reestablish our grounding.
I'm Lisa Helps, and I'm the Mayor of Victoria.
My name's Luke Murray with Arise Developments.
Citizens have come together and raised over $500,000 to build homes for their neighbors. Feels really, for me, like a dose of hope in a really, really otherwise kind of dark period.
The project is a temporary community made up of shipping container housing for people currently living in parks who are homeless. It's going to be made up of 30 individual homes, plus storage containers, bathrooms, and hygiene, and supportive services, all using shipping containers.
We've all been told for the last year, stay at home, and the people who are living in the parks can't follow that public health advice. They don't have a home.
Before contact, housing or a house meant to Indigenous people more than just a structure, more than shelter. It was a place where families hosted entire communities, entire tribes, in ceremony and celebration, in rites of passage for their children, for their brothers and their sisters, family adoptions, and they hosted witnesses to see these stories enacted.
Tiny Town is part of a movement to get everybody living in parks out of parks.
So I recently moved closer to Beacon Hill Park. I was just walking through the park and just seeing more and more kind of tents popping up. And at one of our development projects, we had a brand new shipping container office get delivered. And I remember just standing in there saying, like, why can't someone just live in this? Like, this doesn't seem obscene. Then a news article came out about the BC Housing buying a new motel. And I remember seeing the number of rooms and how much they bought it for. And I was like, wow, that is like a lot of money per home. Per door, you know, we're ranging between $275,000 to $350,000. And you know, we're on track to be doing shipping container housing for, you know, $12,500.
Yeah, our place, we're going to be the operator and manager of the site. It's our job to help create the community, to keep it safe, to keep it fed, to keep it happy, and to keep it on the move to better things.
My name is Janine Theobald, and I'm the Inclusion and Collaboration Manager with the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. So we became involved pretty early on in Tiny Town. We're part of a broader movement and community in regard to ending homelessness, and more importantly, the root causes of homelessness. So we were invited to come in and talk about how to not only design this with people's lived and living experience in mind, the residents who are going to be there, but thinking about the community. And it was really neat because this solution has been something that's been coming to the tables of people with lived and living experience for a long time as being a designated idea, something that could be affordable, accessible, and quickly developed housing.
My name is Robin Zumder. My role in the Tiny Town project, I think, was to really bring my experience growing up in Victoria and loving that city, working as an occupational therapist in mental health for 5 years, but also my PhD in cognitive neuroscience, where I study the psychological impacts of urban design. And so I really tried to bring that lens to the problem that we're trying to solve, which is of how do you create housing for people who desperately need it while also addressing the stigma around mental health and around poverty and around homelessness.
For a city and a country as wealthy as ours, we shouldn't have people living in parks, in tents, in puddles. It's unacceptable.
We have to look at how did we get to this place where we have homelessness and visible homelessness in communities across our country. We didn't get there because people made bad choices. We didn't get there because people have mental illness and use substances. We got there because we had a set of policies that created it.
We've been underbuilding in Victoria since, you know, the federal MERB program ended in the 80s. You may find this fact curious, but in Victoria, between 1981 and 2016, we built 654 rental units. And we had 20,038 people move here in the same time period. So this housing crisis is a failure of policy at the city level of being able to facilitate the delivery of housing to even just keep pace with population growth. But on top of that, we still have very classist zoning in Victoria. So 61% of Victoria is renters. And of those renters, 83% live in multifamily structures. So there's 24,000 people in Victoria who are renters that live in multifamily apartments. They're banned from living on 70% of our land base. So if we have an equity lens, how can we say that banning 24,000 people from living on 70% of the city's land base is fair, is beyond me.
We're going to have to find a way to address this issue because telling young families that they're not welcome in big parts of Vancouver and Victoria means that the things that the single-family homeowners really value about their communities, the schools, the commercial strips, and so on, are going to be really under threat.
The thing about single-family zoning that we don't realize is it started in the US first, but it's heavily ingrained in racist and classist systems. First started in San Francisco with the banning of Chinese laundry workers from being close to jobs. Then it banned Black people from living near fashion districts in New York City. Then that led to redlining, which still suppresses African Americans to this day. So its roots are so racist. So the fact that we're still facilitating its existence in Canada and in Victoria is borderline, yeah, I know it's insulting.
So in my community, there's a neighborhood called Point Grey, and through the middle, it's a single-family neighborhood, really restrictive zoning rules. There's a commercial strip on 10th that is dying. In the middle of the wealthiest neighborhood in the second wealthiest constituency, the commercial strip can't survive, and the school populations are declining. And so that neighborhood is seeing the decline of the things that it really values. And I would suggest that it is because of the incredibly restrictive zoning rules that prevent multiple unit dwellings in that area.
Housing First is a strategy or an approach to healthcare that involves providing housing first, because you can't expect anyone to heal or improve or get the job that they need or have the relationships that support them if they don't have a stable place to call home. If you don't know where you're sleeping or where you're eating or what you're eating on a day-to-day basis, I don't think we can expect anyone to get better.
The model that I think has been most influential on my perspectives is that of Singapore. And their response to it has been very instructive. The state plays more and more of a role in ensuring that there's housing for people who live and work in Singapore. We've graduated more closely to that kind of model. I think that the idea that government needs to play an active role in ensuring that housing is provided is a consistent theme across several different countries. And it's one that's gaining traction in British Columbia simply because of the depth and nature of the housing crisis and the length of time that it's been going on.
We sort of tend to think of homelessness as this local issue. It's actually not a local issue, it's a national issue. It's a problem for every community across this country. And Canada has, only in the last couple of years, a national housing strategy. That really deeply embeds the idea that housing is a human right.
We do not have a free market for housing at all in Canada. If you want to go and start a car manufacturer and build 10,000 cars, you can just go do that. If I want to go build 10,000 homes, I can't. I have to go through dozens and dozens and dozens of municipal regulations to do so. So we actually have a highly restrictive housing market in Canada. There's policies that are actively discouraging the construction of new housing.
This is our main layout. We're going to basically be mirroring this on the other side. 15 housing units down each side. There's going to be storage facilities, electrical hookups. We have the security and site administration offices up of this end, and a flex space for public services and workshops, etc. So it's not only about having somewhere safe to stay and store your stuff, but also access to public services, which aside from housing is another kind of critical thing in addressing the housing crisis and just mental health and addictions in general. We all know there's a housing crisis. We all know there's an overdose crisis. We all know there's a global pandemic, and we're watching people being flooded out of their tents, or watching their tents burn up. And there is a solution, and here it is. How badly do you want to oppose something like that? Down at our assembly site, I was just looking at, a tarp and an old broken pallet. Somebody had been rigging up in the blackberry bushes for a spot to sleep, and thinking about how much better this will be.
I'm inspired by the idea that somebody in the community would look at an empty lot and say, is there a way that we could provide housing quickly and affordably and get people inside who are in crisis, and do it in a way that's not a traditional emergency shelter and provides more dignity and those kinds of things. And so when I heard about the tiny town proposal, I was like, it's really nice. you know, it makes me feel a bit emotional that people in a community would step up in this way and say, yeah, we want to donate money to this. We want to donate time to this. We want to help our neighbors. If there's willingness in community, if people are stepping up, they say we want to help. My preference is to support that and to facilitate that and say, amazing, you know, you're not signing a petition against supportive housing development in your community. You're saying, how can we welcome people into our neighborhood? How can we provide the emergency housing that they need? And that, to me, is a transformative approach to the issue of homelessness and the challenges that it brings.
Yeah, Tiny Town's great. We're really happy to be involved in it. For me, the main reason it's special is that it's a coming together of so many different people and organizations in a way I've never seen before around housing. And it started with $500,000, which is remarkable, being raised by citizens to make this happen.
So I'm a police officer constable for the Victoria Police Department, Mark Jenkins, and my role currently now is a community resource officer. I'm worried about the taxpayers and homeowners that live in that neighborhood, what impact that will have on them.
This is very close to my house. I live about a 5-minute walk from here. Technically, this is North Park, and technically I live in Fernwood, but you know, that's just an artificial boundary on a map. And as for my house, across the street, there's a proposal for 154 units of affordable housing, and I can't vote on it because I'm in conflict officially, but can't wait to see that build, and I hope council says yes.
This community has really stepped in to solution-focused work. And when we really see the opportunity for people who might not have otherwise had purpose, agency, and collaboration with community, there's that relationship, and that does support. Now, there are going to be some challenges. There are some structures in place to support that, such as community advisory committees, and that's an opportunity for people to come together, again, make some trusting relationships to then collaboratively develop solutions for issues as they arise.
I think Tiny Town is a great alternative as long as there's a strong placement committee. Again, I'm a huge supporter of those people that truly are homeless, that want a new beginning. They need to be housed. And I think this is a great opportunity. It is a, you know, as you mentioned, it's a tiny home. And I think it's going to bring somebody, you know, that opportunity and that second chance. But it really needs to come down to making sure that the right people are moving in there.
Some it may simply be a matter of helping them get back to work, but I think more will be about supporting them with their physical health, their mental health, and maybe some addiction challenges as well, so that they can get to a healthier place and then get the sort of permanent housing. It's very likely that most of the folk coming in will have been homeless for quite a long time as well, probably for many years.
My name's Jay, and I've got a spot down at Tiny Town, the containers, outside the Royal Athletic Center there. And you asked me if I was excited about moving down there. I wouldn't really say excited, but I'm happy for it. It's probably a place that I can afford, like, for myself, by myself. I've always had roommates, because in here, it's like you have to have at least one person just to split a bachelor or a studio apartment. And then you get friends of friends, and things get out of control, and then you're back on the street again. So this is like for me and by me. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, I think, you know, first of all, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't worked in the downtown east side. And my reason for getting involved in politics was concern about politicians' responses to homelessness and the challenges facing people who are underhoused. That's why I explored politics at all. And because the reason I got into law was just a total lack of faith in politicians to do the right thing. The lessons that I learned in that community about listening to the voices of the people who actually are living the experience and using those voices and those instructions from the community to form responses rather than your own ideas about what should be done.
My name is Shauna Kinman, and I'm staying at the Memorial Arena Center. Well, I really I'm big into cooking, so I really would like to have my own cooking facilities. and my own bathroom. Those are two things that I would really like to have of my own. I lived communally for years when I was young, and now I'm 53, and I don't really want to, you know, I love being alone. I like my own space, and I just feel like, yeah, I would love, maybe that's asking too much, but I would love to have a bathtub and a kitchen of my own.
The best way to help people move into housing and transition and access healthcare services is to design those services from their perspective.
I was staying at Rock Bay, that's a shelter, and a fellow named Alex had stolen my bike, and I found it up the street, and it was a bit trashed, and I rushed back and ran up to Alex, and I kicked him in the thigh. I was trying to kick him in the nuts, and there's a zero violence policy, so I was told I had to go. Yeah, I had an apartment for 10 years, and I missed that apartment. I can't even really talk about it, so I'm getting sad. I had great rent, and I had a couple of deaths. Sorry, that part's hard. My sister passed away, and then my partner OD'd in our bed, and then my life kind of just fell apart. I tried to end my life the night he went, and then sadly I woke up the next morning, and then I just spiraled out of control, really, and lost my place and lost my job and most of my friends, family, and then, yeah, just became homeless. And fortunately, I met Charles, and he tried to find me housing. I first went to the Super 8, and I couldn't live there. There's no way I was going to live there. It was very sad. And so I decided I'd be outside.
What we mainly do, I think, is provide a place of hope and belonging for folk. This is the largest community center for folk in our city who are homeless or on the margins of society for one reason or another, or struggling with poverty, even if they're housed, or who may be unwelcome in other places. In our society, in our city, for various reasons. This is a place that certainly of no judgment.
What I really enjoy about my job, not only working with the street community and those living in the shelters, it's the amount of people out there that are supporting these people and this cause. It is amazing, the different groups, from the service providers, to all the counseling teams out there, to the Orange Backpackers. I mean, we have individuals out there that, will never be spoken in a more formal way.
We see many stories of people, just ordinary citizens, taking it upon themselves to help and support people who are camping and are homeless and to fight for their rights alongside them.
One individual who works with his community 16 hours a day. He's not paid. He knows the community better than anybody.
My name's Charles Bode. I'm at home, I fall off a building, I fracture my pelvis, I break 3 lumbars, so I'm not very mobile, I'm off work, and 3 weeks later COVID happens and the major shutdown happens, and I'm learning to walk, but I'm also watching what's happening at Pandora Street in front of our place and the growing encampment down there. I'm watching what's happening down at Topaz Park, and I'm seeing that it's not working. The numbers are growing. The amount of people going in offering outreach services didn't seem to be adequate. But what I can do is find an individual who's struggling on the streets, who seems to be in this recurring cycle of being on the streets, not getting the resources they need, and finding out specifically where they're at in their lives, and basically finding realistic goals that they identify for themselves, and then help them along through that step. And I've spent the last probably 12 months since the start of the pandemic going around throughout the community at the various parks that homeless encampments are, as well as throughout the street, and just have been supporting the unhoused homeless community.
People don't just end up homeless and camping in our parks. Usually there's a road to that. So they might be someone who's lost their job, can no longer make rent and lost their home, and are homeless because of that. They also has had severe or profound mental health and addiction challenges, which has meant that they've been really struggling to either keep a job down, to make the money, to pay rent, to get a place, or indeed if they have housing, they may have lost it because of their mental health and addictions, which is the main reason people lose their housing.
The need for mental health. Like, there's no mental health outlets. It's just like it's not out there anymore. Like the one fellow that had the breakdown and he went into full psychosis, he was taken away, and then he was taken, I guess he got assessed. The psychiatric ward up there, anyway, the longest they keep people apparently is 24 hours. So then he was kicked out of the arena, and now I don't know where he is. He's probably back on the streets. So, I mean, they need help, and there's really no help out there for them. And, you know, they're just wandering around like it's crazy. It's dangerous. And like you say, whether you're a drug addict or if you're not a drug addict and you're homeless, you eventually will probably become one because it's a way to numb the pain, right? It's like you can't deal with things, and it's a very good way to not deal. And drugs can sort of, you know, be there to comfort you, and then they become, they're your best friend and then your worst enemy because they work until they don't.
The research shows that homelessness is really hard on your mental health, and people often increase substance use when they become homeless as a way of coping. A lot of times, we look at individuals and we blame individuals for homelessness. And then we're trying to look for explanations, and then we look to these stereotypes of mental illness and substance use as the problem.
I think that COVID's done a number of things around homelessness. Well, one is that it's made it much more visible in our city because folk have been able to camp 24/7. It's become visible 24/7 that we have a lot of people who don't have homes in our city.
Public space is something that we're all entitled to. And the way that our parks are designed, some of the benches using things like defensive or hostile architecture where it's impossible to lie down on a bench, these sorts of cues can really dictate who belongs in these spaces. And at the end of the day, we call it public space for a reason, and we have to consider the marginalized and the homeless as part of this public.
So much of shelters are funded because of the emergency protocols that are in place because of COVID. What happens when that's over? You know, what happens to all these temporary shelters? Because most of them are leased.
Right before the state of emergency happened, of the 1,500 plus individuals who were identified as experiencing homelessness on that date, 1 in 3 of them had been in foster care. And more than half of them had had their first experience of homelessness as a youth. So that's telling us that those individuals who you see out there, many of them had a pretty tough journey into that homelessness. They had perhaps not had their basic needs met in order to be able to build up the resilience and opportunity, finishing school and all those other pieces, that many of the things that people take for granted in their lives. And then on top of that, we have the housing is now, you know, primary residence is now an investment. It's a commodity rather than a home for some people. And the lack of affordable, accessible housing is making it so much easier for people to find themselves in homelessness for the first time as well. We are also seeing a larger portion of individuals experiencing homelessness much later in life for the first time, which is certainly a bit of a canary in the coal mine in regard to the state of our access to housing.
And I think it's also very discouraging and frightening for those that are living in the shelters. I mean, they are human beings. They all have a story. They have a right to shelter. And I think so many of them realize that there's this uncertainty. And we don't know where that uncertainty, what day that is going to happen. And I think that creates a lot of tension in the shelters as well as the rest of the community.
Treatment beds are a good start. After the person leaves, where do they go? What supports travel with them? What home do they move into? And I know, I mean, there's never a time to be more hopeful in British Columbia than right now, because there's a cabinet committee created. It's chaired by Minister Eby. They're working comprehensively to create new models of care for British Columbians who have fallen through the cracks since Riverview and other institutions closed in the 1990s.
So there's a perspective in some municipalities that they don't want supportive housing or shelters because it attracts people to come to that community, to those services. We're doing research right now at the provincial level about whether people in fact do engage in that kind of travel. And the answer is no. People don't travel between census divisions, at least, because they're poor. They don't have any way to travel. They're living outside. And so I get really frustrated with cities that deny the problem they have. So Penticton's a good example. We're in a back and forth with Penticton, and their solution to homelessness is to close their emergency shelter with no other option. There's 40 plus people that live there. 80% of them have been in Penticton for 5 or more years. One of the main reasons for, stated reasons for the city's concern is that they believe that the people in the shelter are not from Penticton. So I'm not sure how many years you have to live in a community before you become a resident of that area, but it's just non-negotiable that there are about 160 people in desperate need of supportive housing in Penticton. And so you can either build the housing for those folks or leave them in the park, but they don't go away. And simply because you say they're not from here doesn't make the issues that they face, even if that's not true, doesn't make the issues that the community faces or that they face any less serious.
But I do think that there is an opinion out there that if you make it too comfortable for homeless people, that more will come here. And to me, that is like, that's such a sad way of looking at it, that we're gonna penalize human beings as a warning sign to keep others away. Isn't that kind of like putting people's heads on stakes? Like, isn't like it is medieval? It's like a medieval line of thinking.
But it is not acceptable to pretend that the people who are living rough in your community outside are not local residents, because they are.
So you take this person who has these challenges, and if we leave them on the street, it costs the general taxpayer $55,000 per year to provide, policing and emergency room visits and ambulance and all of those things. Take that exact same person with those exact same challenges, and it's $22,000 a year to support them in housing. Another way to look at it, again from this same study, is that it's costing us as Canadians $7 billion a year to have around 300,000 Canadians who are homeless. If we put all of those people in homes, the cost to the taxpayer is $4.5 billion per year. So there's actually a savings. Like, if you don't even care about anything else, if you don't care about human rights, if you don't care about people who are outside, if you care about money, like even just from a money point of view, it's better to have people inside.
The profound irony of the housing situation is that the cheapest option for most folks who are facing homelessness or in precarious housing situations is for government to provide them with housing directly. The most expensive housing is jail. Jail is in excess of $200,000 per person per year to provide housing. Shelters, emergency shelters, can be as much as $30,000 per person per year, $40,000. And emergency rooms, hospital beds, incredibly expensive. And the research out of SFU, the SAMI study, and the Chez Toi demonstrate beyond any sort of uncertainty how expensive it is to leave people outside. And so there's no question that providing housing is cheaper than these other kinds of emergency frontline responses that we've been relying on for years. And that can include housing with really intensive supports for people with profound mental health and addiction issues, just being so much cheaper than leaving people out in the streets to be picked up on an almost daily basis by ambulances.
so often lose sight of like who we're doing this all for, you know what I mean? Like, we just get so stuck in process and bureaucracy, and I just think that the one aspect that I'm always stuck on is we just seem to forget that, like, this crisis is aggressive, and that our solutions aren't gonna have to be equally as aggressive, and take, you know, community rallying around it. And so it's just really nice to see how many people contributed.
Smaller communities, not 100 people or more. This site and Russell Street, I think, are points for success.
This whole thing started with, you know, beers at the Fernwood Inn in terms of just a random idea. And what's beautiful about it is, what we were just discussing is that, you know, every single person played a part. You know, these are just steel cans, but I think it's the heart of everybody that got involved every step of the way that ultimately led to homes getting built. You know, like, one group just supplied containers, another group supplied beds, another armoires, but like these things collectively, you know, make up a home for somebody in need. So I think what's beautiful about this is just seeing, you know, safe, secure homes that provide the dignity that humans deserve is just really a beautiful thing, and all the people that came to be a part of it.
Now, pre-COVID, there were hundreds of people living outside, and it's taken a pandemic, but now there are hundreds of people living inside. There will be some people who remain outdoors, but it won't be the numbers that we saw during COVID and pre-COVID. So it will still be work for the bylaw officers and the police, but my hope is that people take the offers that they're getting to move into a pathway to permanent housing rather than staying outside and having to have the bylaw officers visit them every morning and ask them to take down their tent. In 2009, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled across BC and across the country that if there is not adequate shelter for people indoors, that they have a right to shelter overnight.
My name is David Arthur Johnston. The occupation of St. Anne's Academy, it started in 2004. It took me 8 months to get in front of a judge, getting arrested. 60 times in a 4-month period. The whole theme was get in front of a judge, and either the judge is going to put me in jail forever, or the judge is going to say, humans have the right to conscientiously sleep under a tree in public access spaces.
The Crown does not wish for me to get my day in court, for they see a disturbing possible future. That the province be ordered to wholeheartedly endorse a free space tent city within walking distance of downtown. They also see that if the court does not recognize the right to sleep, that it will effectively strip it of any perceived authority in the eyes of any that see this course of events. I've suggested it before. Imagine being the judge that says we all must pay to dream.
One of the things they did to try and make the court case go away is they removed the word loitering from all of the parks bylaws as one of their weapons they could use to move people along, which is good because physically there's no such thing. You can't, it's impossible to loiter. Loitering implies purposelessness. And so loitering is a tyrant's word. So eventually it attracted people, and it inspired a tent city, and that tent city attracted a couple lawyers that came and helped us, and they all made affidavits, and then through much soap opera and court nonsense, it ended up in 2008, October 2008, they struck the Victoria's bylaws that prohibited sleeping in parks wholly. And then that's when they came up with their idea that they could prohibit sleeping during the day only. And so the city has always been playing this as this is us being good, this is our gift to you, which is a fallacy. Like the city basically was engaged in criminal activity in the entire time up until that point. And so it's not the city allowing us to sleep in the parks. It's the right of our right that we've always had that the city's been denying up until that point.
I'm even afraid of leaving my tent to go and get food, but to come back and have my tents removed. And it's like being 30 years old and living through partially of what my ancestors have lived through, being Plains Cree.
Indigenous people in particular are grossly overrepresented in our homeless population compared to their overall representation more broadly. So there's no question that the housing crisis and the lack of availability of housing has had a profound impact on Indigenous people in our province.
In Canada, we actually have an Indigenous definition of homelessness, which speaks about, you know, the sense of belonging and the loss of belonging and the loss of place that Indigenous people have experienced.
So before contact, if a person was ever shunned from a community, if a person was homeless before contact, it would mean that they were disowned or they were shunned from the community, meaning they've done something really bad. They've hurt someone or they've caused enough shame that they could no longer live in the community. So if someone was homeless, they didn't just break the law. They didn't just make a single bad choice. They disrupted the harmony of the community, and so much so that they couldn't recover and they had to leave. So a person that is evicted from their home, they're also evicted from their homeland, from their communities. As I said, they're disconnected from their cultural practices, from their own intrinsic identity. So they're left to wander alone.
My dad was in residential school and my cookum was in boarding school, so there's generational trauma right there. Up to grade 6, the Catholic school system that I was in had a jail cell. I suffer with mental disabilities, and over the past 4 years, I got a physical disability, being fibromyalgia. So it's been a new thing to learn how to walk all over again. Like going from renovations and carpentry to 4 years ago, having that swept away, living with roommates and just being kicked out during COVID over the winter time, and then now here I am still homeless looking for a home in a tent.
When people who were couch surfing got tossed out because everyone kind of shrank their bubbles as everyone was instructed, there was literally nowhere else for people to go, and so that's how 247 camping started in Victoria and across the country.
At the end of the month, they want us to remove the tents, and I have a status card in my pocket, and there's trauma that comes with that status card. There's individuals losing their jobs because of COVID. There's small businesses being shut down because of COVID. And now what happens in the first, they're telling us to get rid of our homes, the last place that we have. It's heart-wrenching, it hurts. Here's the great divide. It's separating us even farther and farther just because of money. It's if you don't have money, they don't want anything, like they don't want us here. Thinking about going and getting a job, well, there's a tent. I would go and get a part-time job and come back and there would be no home left. Here we are getting our homes removed so that they can open the park up for a tourist attraction again? It doesn't make any sense. Like, that's what it feels like in my heart and my soul. And this camp right here, I've been here for a few weeks already, and there's no badness here. Like, everyone's got their own batch of stuff, but we all work together as a team. We keep the place clean.
The vast majority of people camping and people who are homeless are peaceable people, and they're not violent, and they're not looking to attack people. In fact, they're often the most vulnerable people in our society and are open to exploitation and violence themselves, disproportionately, in fact, which is often not known.
I don't understand why the government is the one that's wanting to remove this from everyone. This is our last resource.
So the March 31st deadline was set by council back in November to signal that we wanted everyone to get inside and we wanted parks to be returned to the general public and not as homes for sheltering.
If I could have one wish, it would be stop making deadlines unless they're for housing and saying, you know, we're going to have this many units by this date. That's a good deadline. A deadline for clearing parks and clearing encampments, that kind of deadline doesn't make any sense because you're going to have, you know, you have to secure the units, but you're also putting a lot of pressure on people to make those moves and facilitate transitions that are going to work.
There's definitely tents and campers out there that are currently residing in some of our parks that, even being offered housing, they won't go into these shelters, and that's because of the criminal element that is associated to these shelters. There is definitely a level of violence that is associated with these individuals that are living there, that should not be living there.
I'm on the list, but I don't want to really go down there, I don't think, Russell Street, because that's going to be a nightmare there. To me, it's the mental part of the job. I said, out of 70 people, you're going to have meth heads, pot heads. That's why I wish when we had parks, if you do meth or heroin, you go to that park. If you're just a pot smoker or not, even that, you go to this park, because they're the troublemakers.
We've seen where the criminal gangs will move into a facility and take it over. And there's people who are walking around yours and mine community who I don't think should be out in the community. They're dangerous people, but they continue to get released. It's very difficult to send someone to jail nowadays. You ask just about any officer on the street who makes an arrest, the first thing that comes out is, okay, how do I release this person? Well, if you're a victim of crime, I think if you thought that that was the first thing that was going through the police's mind, you'd be like, well, why? I want that person to be either punished or managed better so that they can not be continually breaking into my house or stealing my bicycle.
The society, I think, fails in a portion that we don't follow up. We don't offer a lot of wraparound resources. These individuals that come here, so many of them are looking for help. That's why they're here. They're looking for that new beginning, and we offer a great deal of resources to get those people off the street. But unfortunately, so many of these individuals on the streets are suffering from drug addiction. They are suffering from mental health. We need, as a society, to offer those supports, those wraparound support services, to continue to support these people. You know, putting them into a shelter and then closing the door and think we've had great success because we've given this person a shelter isn't getting to the main issues that this individual is having. And I think as a society, that's where we fail.
It's really important to recognize that we have been sweeping homelessness under the rug for quite a long time, and COVID made it impossible to do that because we had, you know, a situation where shelters had to reduce the numbers of people. You know, people weren't as able to be in, you know, to couch surf and be in shared accommodations, and so it pushed into visibility what had been consistently been swept under the rug.
It's easier to look at someone as you walk by them and think that they're responsible for where they are. And it's much more challenging to take that broader perspective and look at the reasonings why that is the case. What are the structural causes? What are the systemic factors? What are the things that that person bumped into in their life that made it possible for them to be on the street and for us to walk by them?
Nowadays, when you see people, you see certainly Indigenous people that are living on the streets or living away from home. A common story that I heard when I was in the sector was related to trauma, related to either residential school or racism or any kind of systemic trauma. Anybody that is living on the streets, the stories that they have are much more than just, I don't have a job, or I have a mental health issue, or I have mental health issues. They have entire childhood trauma. They have entire childhoods of trauma related either to residential school, to imprisonment, or poverty. And in my experience recently, I saw many Indigenous community members or civilians, whatever you want to call them, that haven't been home for decades, since they were released their words from residential school, and haven't returned home because they don't fit, they don't belong, and they've lost their connections to their families that provided them security, was gone. I heard from some individuals that living in the street was easier and was safer than having to go home and face some horrible memories or face the truth that their families looked at them differently and saw assimilated children, saw colonized children.
The problem is very, very deep. There are going to be more and more economic homeless. 30 years ago, the main people who were homeless were the hopelessly mentally ill people who were thrown out of the institutions and the few hardcore drug addicts and alcoholics who were around. You know, it was nothing like this. And now it's unbelievable. And it's infuriating that the powers that be have this mindset that we're to blame for our homelessness. What about the fact that it's legal to speculate on land? The idea of speculating on things that are necessities for life, like food, water, farmland, that's insane. People can get rich buying and selling this stuff. What good do they do for society?
I feel so proud of our community. This is a community effort. This is built by the private sector. The money's come from the community. The land has come from the city. The operating funding has come from BC Housing. The coalition's done all the work getting the money through the door. So it's really, this is a really good example of what happens when a community actually cares about each other.
Providing stable, safe, secure housing for human beings is the ultimate reward. And the fact that so many people came alongside us to make this vision happen is just like, that's the cherry on top. Is just, you know, with all the toxicity that exists online, that collaborative approach that this project had kind of reaffirmed some waning faith in humanity. So I feel vindicated that humans are wonderful, empathetic, generous people that want to take care of one another. So that's the reward.
The cure for homelessness and poverty lies within the community itself. So, how to deal with homelessness and poverty? A friend of mine gifted me with a tremendous idea. We'll call it the $1 a day idea. And what it is that if every person were to give $1 a day towards ending homelessness and poverty, in Victoria alone, that's $90,000 a day. I think that would create a lot of accommodation and a lot of support services. Let's say you have 500 people who are on the streets, nowhere to go. You have an annual budget of $58,000 per person. Let's say as a starting point, that we take you down and we put you in the Empress Hotel, clean you up, and help you with whatever issues it is that brought you to be where you are, in that pit where you have no help. Nobody's throwing you a lifeline. So you take police who are now like wondering what they're going to do with themselves and turn them into social workers, right? And you change their entire way of thinking. Because I think that a lot of them, they went in with their heart in the right place. But, you know, they've been jaded.
Everybody's trying to get to the same objective. And I think that's really impressive, that you can have so many different people and so many different groups and so many different mindsets, yet everybody has this common goal. I think the common goal is to get everybody that is deserving, stable and supportive housing.
Every single one of these people living in parks is somebody put a tremendous amount of time and energy into caring for them and tending to them. And no one aspired for their lives to end up this way.
The biggest highlight for me has truly been, I was going to Beacon Hill Park to participate in a talking circle, and I saw some people and they came running towards me, 2 people, and they said, "We got into the tiny homes." And it just, I'm getting goosebumps actually relaying it again, is that it's just brought it into reality that this is actually happening. Like all of this thinking and planning and discussion and great ideas from community have come together, and these people are going to be able to move out of the tent into their tiny home, and they're really excited about it.
Not a single person is arbitrarily just an addict. These are all angels who saw hopelessness and just said, "F it."
But I'm sure glad that there are institutions like Island Health and BC Housing that are giving people what they need to get better.
No, we are not making any money off this. Between our donation of time and energy and cash, we're spending more than 6 figures on this project.
And so patience patience is going to be the religion of the future. It's the only thing that's going to be able to help us maintain our sanity.
Hope is our only pathway to resilience. Education, as damaging as it was, as damaging as it has been, has a chance to turn things around. I have a chance to turn things around. My daughter has a chance to turn things around. I might be the first generation out of the residential school era, but already in my own lifetime, I've seen systemic change, I've seen legislative change, I've seen BC provincial legislation accept the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I've seen Truth and Reconciliation Canada. I've seen massive movements across Canada that are working towards resilience for Indigenous people. So absolutely, I believe there's hope.
I mean, what inspires me is that in the midst of a pandemic that has caused a global crisis and economic collapse, our community has come together to raise $500,000 to give people a warm place to sleep, find opportunities to develop the skills that they need to join the workforce or to be quote unquote productive members of our society. You know, for me, it's really, it seems like a bit of barn raising. How much we're able to do as a group of, you know, less than 10 people who came together to solve this problem, and then have a whole community back us to fund this housing. That's just inspiring to me.
For that homeless person you see kind of yelling on a street corner, they're wearing their problems on their sleeve for the world to see, and it's unfortunate. It can be sad to see. But there's plenty of us that are able to hide our problems a lot more than others. And so we think that, you know, they're the odd ones out. But really, many people in the world are hurting, and we all need each other. And so it's much easier just to be kind instead of judging. We just don't seem to understand, or we don't want to understand that, you know, we need to build more housing to keep pace with the growth coming here. or let's just close the ferries and the airport, and that will solve the problem as well.
I'm always looking at what's coming, and not just 5 years from now, but 50 years from now. And in order to solve these really complex challenges, we need more women in office, and we need more people of color in office. We need diversity in office. Otherwise, we're just going to create the same problems over and over again.
What keeps you going is you'll see that one individual that you helped, and you know, they maybe now working in a grocery store, or they'll come by you and say, thank you for making a difference. And that's just not me. I'd say that's every police officer, every support worker, every counselor, every social worker, you name it. I mean, we all have those stories, and I think that just motivates you to get up the next day and you know, just that one individual that you can help, right? Start a new life.
Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, take me back in time before we lost, before we failed. On the other side of town, I know you're out with her, you lied to me, you let me down. Now my bags are packed and the city's in a mirror. Forget all about you and me and this perfect little failure. As I wait by the stairs, I look behind me and wonder, do you even notice, and do you care? Bare feet and messy hair, I took the whiskey, left a note, and my perfume in the air. Now my bags are packed, the city's in a mirror. Forget all about you and me and this perfect little failure. You took me down to the spring. I'd wonder if you love me, let you do just about anything. I lost me when I found you. I fell apart in tiny pieces, our planet's surface roots. Now my bags are packed and the city's in the mirror. Forget all about you and me and this perfect little failure. I forget what lights me up. Was it you or was it the whiskey? Our dream she interrupts. Our story left untold. I lie awake and wonder, is it her hand